Welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be listening to about the foundations of intelligence, personification, and the call of intelligence. There will be no ads throughout the listening session, so relax and enjoy. Let us know which country you're listening from in the comments. Part 1. The Gathering Storm of Midlife. The rain didn't care about the high-end leather seats or the German engineering of Marcus's car. It smeared across the windshield in thick, blinding sheets, mirroring the chaos inside his chest. He sat idling in the dark parking lot of an empty city park, the engine vibrating with a low, mocking hum. On the passenger seat lay a folder. Inside it were two documents: an impending corporate indictment for a financial maneuver he had signed off on to save face, and a text message from an attorney detailing the terms of a separation agreement from his wife, Sarah. How had he gotten here? If you ask the world, Marcus was the archetype of success. He had the title, the tailored suits, the house on the hill, and a network of contacts that spanned the state. But sitting in the dark, watching the storm water swell into the gutters, he realized a terrifying truth. He had spent 45 years accumulating information, but not a single second acquiring wisdom. He had built an empire on the shifting sands of clever shortcuts, and now the tide was coming in. We live in an era suffocated by information. At no other point in human history has humanity had such instant access to data. We can calculate the distance to distant galaxies with a keystroke, track global markets in real time, and download the collective knowledge of civilizations onto devices that fit in our palms. Yet, look around. Are we happier? Are our families more stable? Are our leaders more grounded? We are drowning in data while starving for direction. We confuse intelligence with insight, and we mistake net worth for network value. This script is an exploration of an ancient remedy to this modern sickness. It is an analytical journey into the wisdom literature of the ancient Near East, specifically the Book of Proverbs. This isn't a lecture on historical artifacts. It is a clinical dissection of human nature, a guide designed to prevent the quiet, catastrophic collapse of a well-educated life. If you have ever felt that your external success is outstripping your internal stability, or if you are standing at a crossroads where the clever path looks lucrative but smells rotten, this exploration is for you. Stay until the end, because the anatomy of wisdom we are about to unpack isn't just about avoiding ruin. It's about discovering a framework of living that survives the storms Marcus is currently facing. Part 2. The Architecture of Choice. To understand why Marcus's life was fracturing, we have to look at the opening blueprint of Proverbs. The text begins not with an abstract philosophical treatise, but with an explicit statement of purpose, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, and for receiving instruction in prudent behavior. The ancients understood something our modern educational systems have forgotten. Knowledge is the accumulation of facts, but wisdom is the mastery of living. You can graduate from an Ivy League institution with honors and still be an absolute amateur at being a human being. The text introduces a phrase that makes modern secular minds uncomfortable. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. To unpack this analytically, we must strip away medieval imagery of a tyrannical deity waiting to strike down mortals with lightning. In the context of ancient wisdom literature, the fear of the Lord represents an acute psychological awareness of an objective moral order. It is the recognition that the universe is not a blank slate upon which we can write our personal whims without consequence. It is the sobering acknowledgement that there are laws built into human relationships, economics, and spirituality that are just as unyielding as the laws of gravity. When Marcus began shading the margins on his corporate tax filings 3 years ago, he didn't do it because he was stupid. He did it because he lacked this foundational reverence. He genuinely believed he was clever enough to outmaneuver the natural consequences of deception. He fell into the classic psychological trap of the clever fool, the individual who possesses high analytical capability but zero moral imagination. He assumed that because the fallout wasn't immediate, the fallout wasn't coming. But wisdom dictates that the universe keeps a meticulous ledger. The text contrasts this reverence with the mindset of the simple and the mocker. In ancient Hebrew psychology, these aren't insults, they are character profiles. The simple is the naive individual, easily swayed by trends, lacking an internal compass, drifting wherever the cultural wind blows. The mocker is more dangerous, the cynical intellectual who scoffs at traditional virtues, views integrity as a weakness to be exploited, and believes that everything can be deconstructed down to self-interest. Proverbs warns that these mindsets are inherently self-terminating. They create an intellectual echo chamber where the individual becomes blind to their own impending obsolescence. Part 3. The seduction of the immediate. The storm outside Marcus's car intensified, the wind shaking the chassis. He picked up the folder and looked at the corporate indictment. It had started so innocently. A colleague, an ambitious vice president named Julian, had approached him over drinks. "It's a grey area, Marcus," Julian had whispered, leaning over the mahogany table. "Everyone does it. It's just an aggressive interpretation of the compliance code. We book the revenue this quarter, clear our bonuses, and fix the variance in the spring. No one gets hurt. Don't be a Boy Scout." This is the exact scenario anticipated thousands of years ago in the opening chapter of Proverbs. "My son, if sinful men entice you, do not give in to them. If they say, 'Come along with us,' let's swallow them alive like a grave. We will get all sorts of valuable things and fill our houses with plunders." The language is visceral, almost cinematic. It describes the perennial allure of the collective shortcut, the temptation to join a tribe that promises wealth without work, outcomes without effort, and power without responsibility. Notice the psychological profile of the enticement. It always relies on two illusions: the illusion of anonymity, "Come along with us," and the illusion of victimless gain, "Fill our houses with plunder." Julian hadn't framed the maneuver as theft, he had framed it as strategy. But Proverbs pulls back the curtain on this delusion. These men lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush only themselves. This is a profound insight into human behavior. Every time an individual compromises their integrity for a short-term advantage, they aren't outsmarting the system. They are actively planting a landmine in their own future. They are setting a trap where they themselves are the prey. Marcus had walked right into it. He wanted the bonus to pay for the beach house that Sarah had been asking for, hoping it would patch over the growing distance between them. He traded his peace of mind for an asset that was now worthless to him. The text notes with devastating clarity, "Such are the paths of all who go after ill-gotten gain. It takes away the life of those who get it." The tragedy of the shortcut is never just that you might get caught. It is that the process of taking the shortcut alters your character permanently. It erodes the psychological muscle required to sustain long-term achievement. You become dependent on the scam, and in doing so, you lose your sovereignty. Part 4. The public cry of realism. Marcus turned on the car's radio, looking for a distraction. But the news was an endless stream of political scandals, market volatility, and cultural polarization. He turned it off. The silence was louder than the static. He remembered a speech he had given at a business gala 6 months ago, where he had spoken eloquently about corporate responsibility and leadership ethos. He had stood on a stage under crystal chandeliers, basking in applause, knowing the entire time that his company's books were cooked. Proverbs portrays wisdom not as a secret, esoteric knowledge reserved for initiates in dark temples, but as a public entity. Out in the open, wisdom calls aloud. She raises her voice in the public square. On the top of the wall she cries out. At the city gate she makes her speech. This is a crucial philosophical distinction. Wisdom is embedded in the very structure of reality. It is screaming at us through history, through our conscience, through the visible wreckage of failed lives around us. It is not hidden, it is ignored. Why do we ignore it? The text gives the answer through the mouth of personified wisdom. How long will you who are simple love your simple ways? How long will mockers delight in mockery and fools hate knowledge? End quote. We ignore wisdom because wisdom demands an immediate confrontation with our delusions. It requires repentance, a radical turning around, an acknowledgement that our current trajectory is flawed. Marcus had heard that public cry multiple times. He had seen a competitor go down for a similar compliance issue 2 years ago. He had felt the knot in his stomach every time his accounting team questioned the entries. The warning signs were flashing in neon colors, but his pride had interpreted those warnings as mere background noise. The text warns that there is a terrifying point of no return in the rejection of insight. Since you refuse to listen when I call, and no one pays attention, I in turn will laugh when disaster strikes you. I will mock when calamity overtakes you, like a whirlwind. This imagery seems harsh until you apply it to systemic reality. When an individual or an organization repeatedly violates the principles of integrity, a threshold is crossed where the consequences become automated and irreversible. Once the structural integrity of a dam is completely compromised, no amount of wishing, praying, or intellectual acrobatics can stop the flood. The disaster behaves exactly like a whirlwind, impersonal, relentless, and absolute. Marcus was now realizing that the whirlwind had arrived, and his previous prestige was entirely useless against it. Part 5. The Subterranean Treasure. Marcus leaned his head back against the headrest, staring at the raindrops racing down the side window. He thought about his father, a quiet high school history teacher who had lived in the same modest suburban house for 40 years. His father had never earned more than $60,000 a year, but he slept like a baby every single night. He spent his weekends gardening and volunteering at the local clinic. When his father died, the funeral was packed with former students whose lives he had completely altered. Proverbs Chapter 2 addresses this contrast through the metaphor of a hidden treasure. My son, if you accept my words. Turning your ear to wisdom, and if you look for it as for silver and search for it as for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord. The text frames wisdom as a resource that requires active, intentional excavation. It does not lie on the surface of popular culture. Popular culture values visibility. Wisdom values depth. Popular culture rewards the loudest voice in the room. Wisdom rewards the quietest mind in the study. This excavation process is protective. The text promises that when wisdom enters your heart, discretion will protect you, and understanding will guard you. Wisdom will save you from the ways of wicked men who delight in doing wrong and rejoice in the perverseness of evil. This protection is not an external magical shield. It is a cognitive filter. When you possess a deep, historically grounded framework of wisdom, you become immune to the intoxicating rhetoric of charismatic charlatans. You see through the empty promises of get-rich-quick schemes or toxic political movements because you recognize their underlying architectural flaws. Marcus's father had that filter. Marcus had always secretly pitied his father's lack of ambition, viewing his quiet life as a waste of intellectual potential. But now, with his own life in ruins, He saw his father's existence for what it truly was, a fortified citadel. His father had dug deep into the bedrock of character, finding a treasure that inflation couldn't touch, that lawsuits couldn't confiscate, and that corporate restructuring couldn't eliminate. Marcus, conversely, had chased the shiny surface tinsel only to find that it was razor-sharp and toxic to the touch. Part 6. The Mechanics of Trust. A text notification lit up Marcus's phone screen. It was from Julian, his co-conspirator. "The board is calling an emergency session tomorrow morning. We need to sync our stories. Remember, we didn't know anything about the off-balance sheet entities. It was all the external audit firm's oversight." Marcus stared at the words. A cold sweat broke out across his palms. Julian was asking him to double down on the deception, to lean into a lie, to construct a temporary safety net. He was facing the ultimate test of human reliance, a moment perfectly articulated in one of the most famous passages of ancient literature. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight." This passage is frequently reduced to a sentimental platitude on greeting cards, but its analytical reality is stark and demanding. To lean on your own understanding means to rely exclusively on your short-term, self-interested calculations. It means believing that you can engineer a web of lies complex enough to catch you when you fall. To trust in the Lord within this wisdom framework means to trust the objective moral framework of reality over your immediate survival instincts. It means having the immense courage to say, even if telling the truth costs me my career, my reputation, and my current comfort, I will tell the truth because I believe that reality is ultimately hospitable to truth and hostile to falsehood. It is a declaration of cosmic alignment. When you align your actions with truth, your path becomes straight, because you no longer have to remember the geometry of your lies. You don't have to keep track of who you told what, which document you falsified, or which story you need to sync up before a board meeting. Proverbs adds a highly specific medical and physical observation to this alignment. "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones." Modern psychosomatic medicine confirms this ancient insight. The chronic stress of living a double life, the constant state of hypervigilance required to maintain a massive deception, pours cortisol and adrenaline into the human bloodstream. It ruins sleep, elevates blood pressure, compromises the immune system, and literally deteriorates the bone marrow. Marcus could feel this physically. His chest felt constricted, his jaw was permanently clenched, and his stomach had been in knots for months. His lack of wisdom wasn't just destroying his career, it was actively killing his body. Part 7. The Currency of Value. The folder on the seat also contained his wife Sarah's terms for separation. She didn't want his money. She wanted out. She had explicitly stated that she was tired of living with a ghost, a man who was physically present at dinner tables but mentally calculating profit margins, corporate politics, and financial risks. He had bought her diamonds, luxury vacations, and designer clothes, assuming that value could always be measured in transactions. Proverbs shifts its focus to a radical redefinition of capital. "Blessed are those who find wisdom, for she is more profitable than silver, and yields better returns than gold. She is more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with her." To a modern capitalist mindset, this sounds like poetic hyperbole. How can an abstract quality like wisdom have a higher yield than gold or silver? But let's look at it through a cold, analytical lens. What are the primary functions of wealth? Security, peace of mind, freedom, and the ability to foster well-being for those you love. Now consider Marcus's position. He has millions in liquidity, yet he has zero security because an indictment is pending. He has zero peace of mind because his conscience is screaming. He has zero freedom because he is trapped by his co-conspirators' texts. And he cannot foster well-being for his family because his marriage is imploding. His gold and silver have utterly failed to deliver the very outcomes he acquired them for. Wisdom, the text notes, carries long life, riches, and honor in her hands, but her riches are of an enduring, non-volatile nature. Wisdom gives you the capacity to enjoy a modest meal with genuine laughter, while a fool sits in a mansion eating expensive steak while choking on anxiety. Wisdom builds a reputation that outlives your bank account. The text goes so far as to anchor wisdom in cosmology. By wisdom, the Lord laid the earth's foundations. By understanding, he set the heavens in place. The implication is profound. When you live according to wisdom, you are operating in harmony with the very physics of creation. When you live as a fool, you are trying to swim upstream against the entire current of the universe. Part 8. The Intergenerational Lineage. The memory of his mother came back to him next, sharp and unbidden. He remembered sitting at the kitchen table when he was 12 years old, crying because he had been cut from the junior high basketball team. His mother hadn't offered him a cheap platitude or gone to scream at the coach. She had sat down next to him, rubbed his back, and said, "Marcus, life will say no to you many times. Your job is to make sure that your character is loud enough to say yes to what matters when it counts." Proverbs frames wisdom as a legacy passed down through generation lines. Listen, my sons, to a father's instruction. I too was a son to my father, still tender and cherished by my mother. Then he taught me and said, "Get wisdom, get understanding, cherish her, and she will exalt you." This highlights the communal, historical nature of insight. Wisdom is not something we are meant to reinvent in every generation. It is an inheritance, a baton passed from runner to runner in the human race. When we cut ourselves off from this inheritance, when we assume that our modern technological advancement makes the moral insights of our ancestors irrelevant, we commit a fatal error of chronological snobbery. We assume that because our ancestors didn't have smartphones, they didn't understand the human heart. But the human heart hasn't changed in 10,000 years. The temptations Marcus faced, greed, vanity, power, shortcutting, were the exact same temptations faced by young nobles in the courts of ancient Jerusalem, Egypt, or Babylon. By disregarding his mother's teaching and his father's example, Marcus had disconnected himself from the ancestral lifeline. He had chosen to be an orphan in time, navigating a treacherous terrain with a map he had drawn himself on a napkin. The text warns that the path of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know what makes them stumble. Marcus was stumbling in the dark because he had intentionally shot out the lights that his parents had painstakingly lit for him. Part 9. The Guarded Core. The rain finally began to ease, tapering off into a steady, rhythmic drizzle. Marcus picked up his phone again. Julian's message was still staring at him. He knew that if he agreed to Julian's plan, he would be stepping onto a treadmill of deception that would never stop. He would have to suborn perjury, falsify internal memos, and throw lower-level analysts under the bus to protect the executive suite. He would have to completely eradicate whatever remained of his conscience. Proverbs reaches a psychological crescendo in Chapter 4 with a directive that serves as the foundation for all behavioral health. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. In ancient Hebrew, the heart, lev, did not refer to the seat of romantic emotion. It referred to the central command center of the human being, the locus of the will, the intellect, the desires, and the core identity. It is the motherboard of your existence. To guard your heart means to monitor the inputs you allow into your deepest self. It means realizing that every book you read, every video you watch, every conversation you engage in, and every compromise you make alters the programming of that motherboard. If you constantly expose your heart to cynicism, greed, and superficiality, your output will inevitably be perversity, anxiety, and ruin. You cannot feed your mind garbage and expect your life to produce a harvest of honor. Marcus had completely failed to guard his heart. He had allowed the corporate culture of hyper-competition, status-seeking, and moral flexibility to take over his internal command center. He had let Julian's cynical philosophies infiltrate his thinking until his mouth became free of perversity, but full of corrupt talk. He had stopped looking straight ahead. His gaze had drifted toward the lucrative side alleys of life. The script of his life was being written by his lowest impulses because the gatekeeper of his heart had fallen asleep on duty. Part 10. The Anatomy of the Trap. The text then pivots into a prolonged, clinical evaluation of one of the most destructive forces known to human stability, the trap of infidelity and toxic relationships. For the lips of the adulterous woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil, but in the end she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. While this can be read literally as a warning against marital unfaithfulness, an analytical reading reveals a broader archetypal principle, the anatomy of the seductive illusion. Whether it is an illicit affair, an illegal financial scheme, or a toxic ideological movement, the mechanics of seduction are always identical. The entry point is always sweeter than honey and smoother than oil. It appeals to our vanity, our loneliness, or our desire for escape. It promises validation without obligation. But the text exposes the hidden cost. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. Keep to a path far from her, lest you lose your honor to others and your dignity to one who is cruel. Marcus knew this trap intimately, not just financially, but personally. 2 years prior, during a period of intense career stress, when he felt disconnected from Sarah, he had engaged in a 6-month affair with a consultant working for his firm. She had told him exactly what he wanted to hear, that he was a genius, that he was underappreciated, that he was a king among men. It was smooth talk, but it had completely eviscerated his internal peace. It created a permanent wall of secrecy between him and Sarah, leading directly to the separation papers currently sitting on his passenger seat. He had traded the running water from his own well, the deep, historical, covenantal love of his wife, who had known him since college, for a fleeting drink from a stranger's cistern. He was now living the exact reality predicted in the text. At the end of your life you will groan when your flesh and body are spent. You will say, "How I hated discipline, how my heart spurned correction." The illusion had evaporated, leaving behind a desert of regret and a massive bill that he was now forced to pay. Part 11. The Industry of the Small Marcus. Looked out the window and noticed an old, weathered maintenance shed at the edge of the park. Under an outdoor light, despite the damp cold, a line of tiny ants was systematically moving across the concrete ledge, carrying small fragments of organic debris back to their nest. They worked with an eerie, uncoordinated coordination, oblivious to the human drama unfolding in the luxury car 40 feet away. Proverbs Chapter 6 points directly to this exact scene as a masterclass in economic and psychological discipline. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. This is a profound critique of human passivity and the illusion of entitlement. The ant operates on internal drive. It does not require an external manager to threaten it with termination to do what needs to be done. It understands the cyclical nature of time, that summer is for preparation so that winter can be for survival. The text warns against the slow, creeping paralysis of complacency. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. Poverty and ruin rarely arrive like an explosion. They arrive like a slow leak. They are built on the accumulation of small, seemingly insignificant decisions. A task delayed, a conversation avoided, an error ignored, a morning spent hitting the snooze button. You fold your hands just for a moment, and while you are resting, the structural foundations of your life are being quietly eaten away by termites. Marcus had been an ant early in his career, working 80-hour weeks, mastering the details, building his foundations. But once he achieved status, he transitioned into a sluggard of character. He stopped doing the hard, internal work of self-examination. He outsourced his morality to his legal team and his happiness to his brokers. He wanted the harvest without the seasonal labor of maintenance. He forgot that the moment you stop actively building your character, you aren't standing still. You are actively sliding backward down the hill. Part 12. The Metric of Ultimate Accounting. The text concludes this section with an almost terrifying architectural list of things that are fundamentally incompatible with a stable universe. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil. Let's analyze this list not as an arbitrary collection of divine pet peeves, but as a diagnostic manual for societal and personal collapse. Notice the progression. It starts with the internal attitude, haughty eyes, the pride that believes it is above the law. It moves to communication, a lying tongue, the destruction of truth within community. It escalates to physical action, hands that shed innocent blood, and a heart that devises wicked schemes. This is a description of a completely inverted human being, an individual who has weaponized their intellect, their speech, and their power to exploit their fellow human beings for personal advancement. Marcus looked at Julian's text message again. We need to sync our stories. He saw the anatomy of the wicked scheme laid bare in digital ink. If he responded with a lie, he would be checking every single box on that ancient list. He would be using a lying tongue, executing a wicked scheme, and effectively destroying the careers of innocent junior staff. To insulate his own position, he would become the exact entity that the universe is structurally designed to reject. The text provides the ultimate, non-negotiable metric. Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out. When the storm has swept by, the wicked are gone, but the righteous stand firm forever. This is the central thesis of the entire book of Proverbs. Integrity is not an expensive luxury that you purchase when you have enough money. Integrity is the insurance policy that ensures your survival when the storm hits. A crooked path may give you a temporary shortcut around a mountain, but it will eventually lead you directly over a cliff. Part 13. The Great Refusal. Marcus took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs. The tightness in his chest didn't completely disappear, but for the first time in 3 years, he felt a strange, solid stillness taking root at the base of his spine. He picked up his phone. He didn't open the chat with Julian. Instead, he opened his email client. He addressed a new message to the chairman of the board's audit committee and the Federal Regulatory Liaison Officer. He began to type, "To whom it may concern, I am writing to formally report a systemic compliance violation within our third quarter financial reporting. I signed off on these entries under duress and with flawed judgment. I have attached the unredacted ledgers. I accept full personal responsibility for my negligence and am prepared to cooperate fully with any subsequent investigation." He held his thumb over the send button. His hand shook slightly. He knew what this meant. It meant his career at this level was finished. It meant his name would be dragged through the business press. It meant he might spend time in a federal minimum security facility. It meant the beach house was gone, the prestige was gone, and the illusion was dead. But as he looked at the text, he realized something profound. He was finally buying back his soul. He was trading his silver and gold for wisdom. He was choosing the straight path, even if that path led through a valley of deep humiliation. He pressed send. The phone made a soft, clicking sound as the email left his outbox. The silence that followed was no longer mocking. It was clean. He turned the key in the ignition, put the car in gear, and drove out of the dark park into the rain-washed city streets. He was heading to Sarah's apartment, not to beg her to stay, not to negotiate a better settlement, but to sit on her steps, look her in the eyes, and tell her the absolute, unvarnished truth for the first time in a decade. He was ready to start digging for the hidden treasure.